Hey everybody, and welcome back to Autumn Leigh at Home. Today we are going to be water bath canning peaches. If you are new to canning peaches, please join me as we get started. We are definitely at the end of the season, so I'm kind of late to the ball game on this one. But now that our air conditioning is finally fixed, we are able to do a bunch of canning projects that I have been putting off, and peaches is one of them. I didn't want to let peach season go by without at least canning some peaches, so we were able to get 8 pints out of this, as well as half of another pint that I stuck in the fridge. And these peaches, as you can tell, are the end of the season peaches, which, as they say in Sweet Home Alabama, sometimes those make the sweetest jam and or peaches. So we are going to go ahead and get started with cleaning the peaches. This recipe calls for 6 to 9 pounds of peaches, and I tried to find the best ones I could out of that basket of peaches. We were definitely on the last leg, but I was able to find 9 peaches that looked really healthy, looked good, were not overly ripe, and don't worry, the rest of those peaches will not go to waste. I went through and I cleaned all the rest of those peaches from that basket, and I was able to cut them up and put them in the freezer for smoothies or little frozen treats that I like to make for the kids, and they will definitely get eaten. I am doing this project late at night while my kids are in bed and asleep, so I'm trying to use my time wisely, and I thought I would go ahead and get the syrup that the peaches will be in cooking, and we want to bring this up to a boil. So I did I think the recipe called for 3 cups of water and 3 cups of sugar. Instead, I bumped that up because I knew I was at the top of that recipe range of 6 to 9 pounds, and I did just above 9 pounds. So I did 4 cups of sugar and 4 cups of water. I wanted to get the syrup going while I was cutting my peaches, and that way, once I brought it up to a boil, I let it boil for about a minute, or at least until all the sugar is dissolved into the water and incorporated, and that way I can let it sit on the stove and kind of stay warm on the stove while I'm cutting my peaches, and it would be ready to go when I was ready for it. So thankfully, it didn't have to be the perfect timing of when my peaches were done. I just let it stay on the stove warm. Once it finished boiling after about a minute or so, I turned it down to just low heat so it stayed warm. While the syrup is coming up to a boil, I got my larger pot out and filled it up with water, and I'm going to try to bring that up to a boil as well, because the goal is for me to blanch the peaches. That way they hold their texture and their taste once you put them in the canning. And before doing that, while the water is coming up to a boil, I want to make it easier and make life easier on me for later on when we need to take the peels off. And to do that, I am finding the little line that you find on the peaches. I'll show you here in a minute what I'm talking about and what that looks like. I'll point to it, but you want to find that line, and here you see me cutting them in half. You can leave them cut in half. I decide later on to actually cut them in fourths because they fit in the jar, and this is the line I'm talking about. If you cut along that seam, it just cuts beautifully and you don't really have any issues later on. And so I cut all the way around the pit of the peach, and then I did another time later on, I went through and cut them into fourths. So I just slide my knife along the pit of the peach, and that way when you blanch them and you put them in boiling water, they are a lot easier to take the peels, and you don't have to squeeze them to try to take them apart to get the pit out, which worked out beautifully. I had no issues. After I did the cutting of the peaches, it's time to make sure my jars are nice and clean. We no longer have to sterilize our jars. So they changed the ruling, and I will put that down in the description below. I'll put the link there. That way, if you're interested in researching it yourself, go for it. And if I need to be corrected, by all means, feel free to let me know. But I would love for you guys to do your own research too. But I will put that link down there. And thankfully, as long as your processing time is over 10 minutes, you no longer have to sterilize. That being said, you still want clean jars because you don't want to put your food in dirty jars and then can it. So I'm going through and just making sure all of mine are nice and squeaky clean since they've been sitting on my shelf. I always clean them after use. However, because they sit on the shelf, sometimes they collect dust, and I just want nice clean jars to get started. If you are new to canning, give me a thumbs up down below. We are all learning here, and I want to create a community of encouragement that it is doable, even if you don't have any friends or family that do it. I am self-taught. I'm still learning with that being said, so please feel free to share any advice if you have been doing it for an extended period of time. We are all going to learn and help each other and hopefully encourage each other as well as we go. Here I am taking all those other peaches and I've cut them up and placed them in separate bags, but I also thought it would be fun for you guys to see what the process looks like. My kitchen is chaos. There are peaches and pots and bowls everywhere, and I just thought it would be fun to see behind the scenes of what it looks like while I'm filming. Here I am taking my peaches. It is now time to blanch them because my water came up to a boil. So I am quickly and trying to stay focused, but quickly trying to get them all into the pot. And then you want to boil them for about a minute, I believe. I would like to be transparent with you guys and share my flaws, and that way you can learn from my mistakes. But I did not bring the peaches back up to a boil fast enough for whatever reason. I had a hard time once I put them all in there to get it to a boil, so I ended up overcooking my peaches. I have tasted them. They taste fantastic, so it hasn't affected the taste, but I just couldn't tell if they were ready to come out because the peels were not peeling very easily, and typically it's easy to peel things off once you blanch them. It's easy to get the peels off. So either way, it ended up fine, but I can tell I definitely overcooked them because they were a lot mushier than they should have been. But to stop the cooking process, you have to get a big bowl of ice and water and take them directly out of the bowl, out of the pot of boiling water, and put them in the ice water to stop the cooking process. And again, I overcooked these, so don't make my mistake. Also, stay focused. Do not walk away like I did. It can cause your peaches to become mushy, and you don't want this to be all for naught. This project ended up taking a lot longer than I expected it to, mainly because I didn't want the over-ripened peaches to go to waste. I wanted to make sure that I preserved them before losing them, and they were very much on the verge of being lost. I did have to throw out, I think, maybe one or two, which out of that whole basket really wasn't that bad. But I was able to cut up the peaches and freeze them, and that process actually took a lot longer than I expected. But once I got it done, I had 3 gallon-sized bags of peaches in the freezer that I can then use for smoothies or snack, or even using them for peach jelly. If I want to make peach jelly, peach jam later on, I can pull those out of the freezer and use those. It is now time for me to peel and pit our peaches, but while I'm doing that, I want my water to be working for me and water to be going and doing something while I'm doing something. So I'm going to fill up my pot of jars with water, and I put it just above the jars in water in each jar. Bring that up to a simmer. It does not have to be a boil because, again, we're not sterilizing. Our goal is to make everything about the same temperature. The syrup, the jars, the peaches, all of it, we want it all to be kind of warm slash hotter warm. That way they're all about the same temperature. And while that's coming up to a simmer and getting warm, it is time to peel and pit my peaches. This is fruit fresh that you see me pouring into the bowls. That will keep them from turning brown as I am peeling and pitting them. Here, I just want to stop and say, save your peels and pits, because those you can use by putting them in a gallon-sized bag and sticking them into the freezer, especially the peels. Maybe not so much the pits, but the peels. And if you have a lot of peach left around the pits, then I guess you could save that too. But put them in a gallon-sized freezer bag, stick them in your freezer, label them 2024. That way you know when they were, and you could put peaches on it. Stick them in the freezer. That way you don't have to think about it right now, but you will have them available to you for making peach jam later on. We did this last year. I did it the year before, and I created a film for you guys about it that I will link on to the end of this video. So if you are currently canning peaches, save your peels and pits, stick them in a freezer bag, and watch the video after this video. That way you can learn how to use them for peach jam at home and make yourself some peach jam. Now back to our regularly scheduled programming. I am currently pitting and peeling my peaches and putting all of that in a bowl that will then go into a freezer bag. But to do this, I am being very careful. If you cut your peaches like I did before, whether it's in half or quarters, before you blanch them, it should be very easy to just gently twist them to break them apart. Or they may have already fallen apart in the blanching process. And then that way you can easily, hopefully, just peel off the peels and cut off any areas that may look a little gooey. If you don't care how they look in the jar, which most people don't, then I wouldn't worry about cutting off the ooey gooey parts. But if you want them nice and stacked and looking beautiful in the jar, that's when you may want to cut out the center of where the core was or any pieces that look kind of gooey. The more you handle the peaches, the more gooey they're going to look in the jar, so keep that in mind. Try not to handle them if at all possible. Because I overcooked mine a little bit, mine did turn out a little gooier looking than others. But again, I was going more for taste this time around, and they still turned out tasting fantastic. So I'm just not going to worry about it, and I'm going to move on and chalk it up to a learning experience. When I was cutting those and peeling and pitting those, I put them directly into the syrup that we had cooked for and boiled for a minute earlier on in this episode. I put them directly in that pot and put them back on the stove, and I want to bring those up to a boil again for about a minute to 3 minutes. But again, be very careful not to overcook or let it burn. Once I got the syrup and peaches back on the stove, combined in a pot to bring up to a boil to let them kind of cook together, I brought my jars over to go ahead and pour those out and get those out on the counter so that they are ready once my peaches are ready. Now everything is about the same temperature and it is time to start filling them. You saw a few minutes ago, I did get a distilled white vinegar, 5% out. That is to clean the rims of the jar once I have the peaches in there. So I just kind of set that to the side and put a little bit in a bowl, and I'll use a paper towel and you'll see that later on. But just kind of keep that in mind that you will need that to clean the rims. As I'm pulling the jars out of the simmering pot, I'm pouring the water back into the pot because later on I'm going to need there to be a good bit of already warm water in there, because to water bath can, you have to have at least an inch of water above the jars. And I will show you a trick that I use to test whether it's an inch without sticking your finger in a hot water. Here I'm taking my peaches. I'm taking my peaches and putting them into the jar. This is called hot packing because everything is already hot and cooked up together. And I want to do my best to try to flip them so that it's the core side down, because they just stack a lot easier and you can get a lot more in the jar that way. And if you are able to do that without burning yourself or causing the peaches to become even more mushy or anything like that, then you're actually less likely to have that layer of liquid at the bottom or syrup and all of them floating to the top. I still had some because I wasn't able to get all of them stacked perfectly beautiful. Again, tonight it was a late night and it was just my goal to get this done, because I have also learned that when you are canning stuff, produce isn't always ready when you are ready. You have to be ready when it is ready. And when you're canning, that's something that you kind of have to learn. And my peaches were ready and slightly past ready, but I just, as a busy mom of four, sometimes you just have to make time to do projects that are important to you or that you find joy in. And that's what I was doing tonight. So it was a very late night. I think I stayed up till 1 o'clock in the morning trying to get this project done, but I'm so grateful that I did because, again, I enjoy doing this. So even though it was tiring and late, it was fun for me. I enjoy this kind of thing, and now I know that I have a healthy snack on the shelf from farm fresh peaches that we bought from a local farmer that they can eat and enjoy. And they love it when I do this. They always go for these jars of peaches. They never last very long in this house at all. To be honest, I need to probably start buying a whole bushel, like a whole box of peaches. But this is baby steps. I don't want to overwhelm myself and burn out on it either. It's a learning process, and it has gotten a lot easier, so that bulk canning may come in the future. But for now, I'm just going to give myself grace and be excited that I was able to get this project done when the peaches were ready. After I filled my jars with the peaches, I went around and went through and just topped them all with the syrup till I got about a 1/2 inch of headspace. If you're new to canning, I have a whole nother video that explains all the utensils that I use, the difference between pressure canning, water bath canning, and all the details. And if you have any questions, of course, feel free to comment below and I will do my best to answer them. But if you're new, go ahead and watch that video in my playlist of food preservation. It will help you understand it a lot better. But right now I am burping my jars to get all the air bubbles out, because that can affect whether or not your lids seal. and you don't want to have any air bubbles. You can actually see the air bubbles pretty well in this video here. It will show you right here. You saw some bubbles kind of pop up there. That can affect your seal, and obviously you're doing all this work. You don't want that to happen. So just go around and burp the jars. That's what it's called, and that's just debubbling them, getting all the bubbles out. And then you want to go through and retop the syrup, remeasure headspace, which is what I'm doing here and using this tool for. For peaches, headspace is 1/2 inch. It could be different depending on what you are canning. So make sure you are looking at the food preservation books or whatever it is that you're using. That will help you determine what headspace it is. Now that I have the proper headspace for the liquid and the peaches, I'm going through and using that white distilled vinegar that I was telling you about, that I said set it aside and you will pull it out later. Now is that time. You will pull it out later right now, and just dip either a clean cloth or a paper towel in it and rub it along the edges. As you're doing that, you can check for nicks and dings in the jars to make sure that there aren't any, so that you have a good seal, and clean the rims to get all that sticky, sugary syrup and peaches off of it, so that again you get a really good seal and you don't have to worry about the cans popping open later on. Now that I have that, I put all of my lids on the jars and I'm tightening them with the rings finger tight. That's where you just tighten them until you meet resistance, and then just a little bit more, just a smidge more. Now that we have our rings and lids on, it is time to pull the pot of water back off the stove. I put it back on there while I was filling the jars so that it could stay warm and kind of simmering, so that again, once we put the hot jars back in there, everything's about the same temperature. Once we have all of the jars in there, we want to make sure that we have at least 1 inch of water above the jars. And to do that, I use the headspace measuring tool with the teeth marks that look kind of like stair stepping. That I know is at least 1 inch, and so that way I'm not sticking my finger in hot water to try to determine if it's 1 inch or not, or using some other tool. By doing that, I can stick this tool in there, pull it back up, and you can easily tell that it is above that inch mark of headspace. And so I know that my water is good. While that comes up to a rolling boil, I am going to taste test the product. I get to be the one to taste test. That's kind of the props of and the positive part about being the cook. Y'all, these peaches were so sweet and tasted so good. Totally worth the super late night, by the way. I will say that once you hit about midnight, your back starts hurting, your feet start hurting, and you definitely feel your age. But again, it's worth it. And now that it is almost finished, you see a rolling boil. This is what we want to see. A rolling boil is when even if you were to stir it, the bubbles do not go away. So this is what we're looking at right now. I set the timer for 20 minutes, and it will be different depending on whether you're doing quart size or pint size. Because my jars are pint size, I am processing for 20 minutes, which means that it is at a full rolling boil and continuous rolling boil for 20 straight minutes. So I set my timer, it is finished, then I let my pot stay on the stove untouched for, I would usually say, about 30 minutes. I did kind of push it this time. I got them out after about 15 minutes, but at the very least, the ball canning preservation book says to at least leave them 5 minutes. I did go a little longer than that, but I did pull these out, set them on the counter. You want to make sure you put a cloth down so that they're not a hot jar on a cold counter, because that could cause them to bust or crack. That would definitely be no good. Once you have all of your jars out of the pot and on the counter, you want to let them rest there for at least a good 12 hours. That means it is now bedtime. So I let these sit here for 12 hours, leave the rings on for that 12 hours. In the morning, a good 12 hours later, you can take the rings off, make sure that they sealed properly, and the rings do not create the seal. They don't hold the seal on. The lid will stay sealed. That's part of the water bath canning process, even when you take the rings off. And it's actually best to take the rings off before you place them on the shelf, because if not, you can cause yourself to have a false seal. What that means is the temperature in the room that you're keeping the jar can change. And if you lose the seal on your jar, the ring can actually cause your jar to reseal after already getting mold in it or becoming moldy, and you won't know it until you go and open your jar. And obviously, nobody wants that. We don't want any false seals, so make sure you take the rings off your jar. That way, if it is going to unseal, you want to know because you don't want to eat mold or anything that's gone bad. So you will know that way it will start becoming moldy, it will start smelling. The ring is not what keeps it sealed, so it is okay to take the ring off. As you can tell, my lids stayed sealed, and now I am labeling them with peaches and the date. Then I do give them a quick little wash. Again, don't be super rough with the peaches or the lids, but I don't have to be super gentle either. These lids are very well sealed, and so I was able to just wash the outside of the jar with Dawn soap and stick them up on the shelf, and then you are done and have shelf-stable peaches. I just want to take this time to say thank you so much for joining me. Please like, subscribe, and share down below, and I hope to see you next time.